The harsh winter wind carried Nathan Xavier's scowling face across the dusty plains of Montana Territory. 1887. As he stumbled upon a woman half frozen in the snow, clutching a tattered quilt that did little to shield her from the biting cold. Her pale face looked up at him, eyes unfocused, lips blue from the freezing temperature that had swept across the frontier without warning. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "I've nowhere to go." Nathan pulled his horse to a stop, his weathered face hardening as he assessed the woman before him. At 32, he'd seen enough of life's cruelties to know better than to trust strangers, especially in these parts where desperation drove people to terrible acts. But leaving her to freeze seemed equally unconscionable. "Where'd you come from?" he asked gruffly, not dismounting. "Silver Creek. The stagecoach left me behind when I couldn't pay the full fare." She struggled to stand, her thin frame shaking violently. "They called me useless. Said I'd be better off dead than taking up space." Nathan sighed heavily, cursing under his breath. He'd heard of stage drivers like that, ruthless men who cared more for profit than human life. Against his better judgment, he extended his gloved hand. "Name's Nathan Xavier. Got a ranch 10 miles north. You can warm up there, then figure out your next move come morning." Relief flooded her face as she reached for his hand. "Grace Bennett, I promise I won't be any trouble." Nathan hoisted her onto his horse, noting how little she weighed. "Everyone's trouble, Miss Bennett, just a matter of what kind." The ride to Nathan's cabin was silent save for the wind and Grace's occasional shuddering breaths. His property came into view as the sky darkened a modest cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a sturdy barn beside it, and fenced pastures stretching beyond. It wasn't much compared to the sprawling ranches owned by cattle barons, but it was his, bought with years of hard work and careful saving. As they approached, a border collie raced out to greet them, barking excitedly. "That's Scout," Nathan said as he helped Grace dismount. Her legs buckled beneath her and he caught her before she fell. "Been with me 5 years now, best cattle dog in the territory." Inside, the cabin was simple but warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering light across the wooden floors and sparse furnishings, a table with 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with worn volumes, and a rocking chair near the fire. A narrow bed occupied one corner while a curtained-off area presumably held another sleeping space. "You can take the bed tonight," Nathan said, gesturing toward it. "I'll sleep in the chair." Grace shook her head firmly. "I couldn't possibly, it's not a request," he interrupted. "You're half frozen. Need proper rest." Too exhausted to argue, Grace nodded gratefully. Nathan busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork while she huddled by the fire, gradually regaining feeling in her extremities. "If you don't mind me asking," Nathan said as he placed a steaming plate before her, "what brings a woman alone to these parts, not exactly hospitable country?" Grace hesitated, eyes fixed on the food. "I was a teacher in Illinois. Lost my position when the school board chairman's son failed my class. I heard Montana needed educators." She gave a bitter laugh. "What they failed to mention was they wanted someone who could teach and manage a household. I've never been particularly skilled at domestic affairs." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "That why they called you useless?" Her cheeks flushed. "That, and I spent what little money I had on books instead of proper winter clothing. The stagecoach driver said I was useless as a 3-legged horse when I couldn't cook for the passengers or mend one man's torn jacket." She met his gaze defiantly. "I know my worth isn't measured by such things, but out here, it seems that's all that matters." "Out here, survival matters," Nathan corrected. "Everything else is luxury." They ate in silence after that, Grace clearly savoring each bite of the simple meal. When they finished, Nathan cleared the plates, then fetched a worn nightshirt from a trunk. "It'll be too big, but it's clean," he said, handing it to her. "I'll step outside while you change." True to his word, Nathan exited the cabin, giving Grace privacy. When he returned, she was already in bed, her travel-worn clothes folded neatly atop her small carpet bag. "Thank you," she said softly as he settled into the chair, wrapping a blanket around himself. "For everything." Nathan merely grunted in response, watching the fire until her breathing deepened into sleep. Morning came with a brutal snowstorm that eliminated any possibility of travel. Nathan rose early, stoked the fire, and pulled on his coat. "Need to check the livestock," he told a groggy Grace. "Stay inside, storm's bad." He spent 2 grueling hours ensuring his small herd of cattle had access to food and water, breaking ice and distributing hay while the wind threatened to knock him off his feet. By the time he returned to the cabin, his fingers were numb despite his gloves and his face raw from the cold. The scent that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Fresh bread? He hadn't had that since. He couldn't remember when. Grace stood at his small stove, her hair tied back as she carefully removed a golden loaf from the oven. The table was set with 2 plates and a pot of something bubbled on the stovetop. "You're back," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "I hope you don't mind. I found flour and decided to make myself useful." Nathan stomped snow from his boots, his expression guarded. "Thought you weren't domestic." "I said I wasn't particularly skilled," she corrected with a small smile. "Not that I couldn't manage the basics. Besides, bread is just chemistry. Flour, water, salt, and time." Skeptical but hungry, Nathan washed up and sat at the table. Grace served him a bowl of stew, a creative concoction of preserved vegetables, dried beef, and herbs he'd forgotten he had alongside a slice of warm bread. The first bite nearly made him groan aloud. It wasn't fancy, but it was the best meal he'd had in months. "This is good," he admitted grudgingly. Grace beamed. "Thank you. I also organized your medical supplies. They were scattered everywhere. I hope that's all right." Nathan glanced toward the shelf where he kept various salves, bandages, and medicines. Previously a chaotic jumble, they now stood in neat rows, clearly labeled. "How'd you know what was what?" he asked between bites. "My father was a doctor," she explained. "I assisted him until he passed. You have quite a collection, some items I haven't seen outside a proper surgery." Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "Did some medical work during the war. Habit of collecting supplies stuck." Grace nodded, not pressing for details. "Well, now you can find what you need in an emergency." The storm raged for 3 days, keeping them confined to the cabin. Initially, Nathan expected to find the arrangement intolerable. He'd lived alone for years by choice, not circumstance. To his surprise, Grace proved to be both unobtrusive and unexpectedly helpful. On the second day, she discovered his collection of books and spent hours organizing them by subject and author, occasionally reading passages aloud in a clear, expressive voice that made even dry historical texts sound interesting. When she found his neglected ledger books, she offered to help straighten his accounts. "I'm quite good with figures," she said. "Taught mathematics alongside literature." Reluctantly, Nathan allowed her to review his haphazard records. By evening, she'd produced a comprehensive accounting of his ranch's finances for the past year, revealing both where he was losing money and opportunities he'd missed. "If you invested in better breeding stock next spring," she suggested, showing him her calculations, "you could increase your profit by nearly 30% within 2 years. Nathan studied the neat columns of numbers, impressed despite himself. "Where'd you learn this?" "Don't recall this being standard ladies' education. My grandfather owned a small mercantile," Grace explained. "He believed women should understand business as well as men do, said it was foolish to limit half the population's potential." Her expression turned wistful. He was ahead of his time. On the third day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. Nathan stood on his porch, assessing the damage minimal, thankfully while considering his unexpected houseguest. By all rights, he should be eager to see her on her way. Instead, he found himself dreading the conversation about her departure. She'd proven herself far from useless. In fact, She'd improved his daily life in countless small ways he hadn't realized needed improving. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Grace said, joining him on the porch. She'd wrapped herself in one of his old blankets, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Like everything's been made new," Nathan nodded, unable to disagree. "Roads should be passable in a day or two. I can take you to Whitefish then. There's a train station." Grace's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, I've imposed long enough." "Wasn't an imposition," Nathan said gruffly, surprising himself with his honesty. "You've been helpful." "High praise indeed from a man of few words," she teased, though her eyes remained serious. "Thank you for saying so." "Those men on the stagecoach, their words affected me more than I care to admit." Nathan turned to face her fully. "Those men were fools. Value of a person isn't measured by how well they cook or so." "What is it measured by, then?" she asked softly. "Character," he answered without hesitation. "Kindness, intelligence." He paused, feeling uncharacteristically flustered under her steady gaze. "You've got plenty of all three." A delicate blush colored her cheeks. "I appreciate that, Mr. Xavier." "Nathan," he corrected. "Think we're past formalities." "Nathan," she repeated, her voice warming the cold air between them. "And I'm Grace." That evening, Nathan surprised Grace by pulling out a chessboard he'd carved himself years ago. "You play?" he asked, setting up the pieces. "I do," she confirmed, eyes lighting up. "Though I warn you, I'm rather good." She wasn't exaggerating. 3 games later, Nathan stared at the board in disbelief as she cornered his king yet again. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he demanded, not entirely displeased. Grace laughed, the sound brightening the cabin more effectively than the lantern light. "My grandfather again. He believed chess built character and strategic thinking." She reset the pieces, her fingers lingering on the carved knight. "These are beautiful. Did you make them?" Nathan nodded. "During my first winter here, needed something to occupy my hands." "You're quite talented," she observed. "Have you made other things?" Hesitantly, Nathan rose and went to a trunk in the corner. From it, he withdrew several intricately carved wooden animals: a bear, an eagle, a wolf, each rendered with remarkable detail. "Just passing time," he said dismissively, though his ears reddened at her obvious admiration. "These could sell for good money in town," Grace suggested, carefully examining the eagle. "Or in the cities back east." Nathan shrugged. "Never thought about selling them." "You should," she insisted. "It's another potential income stream. Diversification is key to financial stability." The matter-of-fact way she spoke about business without condescension or unnecessary elaboration reminded Nathan why he'd grown comfortable with her presence. She spoke to him as an equal, neither deferring unnecessarily nor assuming ignorance on his part. The next morning, Nathan rose early to check his trap lines. When he returned midday with 2 rabbits, he found Grace sitting at the table with papers spread before her. "What's all this?" he asked, hanging his catch. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said, gesturing for him to join her. "You're land rich but cash poor, which limits your ability to improve your herd, but there are ways to address that." She drafted a comprehensive business plan for his ranch, identifying multiple revenue streams he'd never considered. Selling his carvings to tourists in nearby towns, offering hunting guide services during seasons when ranch work was lighter, even starting a small orchard of hardy apple varieties that could thrive in Montana's climate. The initial investment would be minimal, she explained, showing him her calculations, and the potential return substantial within 3 to 5 years. Nathan studied her work, impressed by both the thoroughness and practicality. "You've put a lot of thought into this." "I enjoy problem solving," she admitted. "And she stopped abruptly, looking embarrassed. "You what?" he prompted. Grace hesitated. "I wanted to repay your kindness somehow. This seemed the most practical way." Nathan felt something shift inside him, a wall he'd built years ago starting to crumble. "No repayment necessary," he said softly, "but I appreciate the effort." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment neither spoke. Nathan felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, a sensation he'd nearly forgotten. Grace was the first to look away, her cheeks flushed. "I should prepare those rabbits," she said, rising quickly. "They'll make an excellent stew." The roads cleared the following day, making travel to town possible. Nathan saddled his horse early, intending to check on neighbors and gather news. He found Grace in the barn, confidently feeding his 2 milk cows. "They're lovely animals," she said when she noticed him watching. "Especially the Jersey. Her milk yield must be impressive." Nathan nodded, impressed by her knowledge. "Planning to head into town, need anything?" "Perhaps some writing paper if it's not too much trouble," she replied. "I should write to my aunt in Vermont. She'll be worried about my silence." The mention of communication with family reminded Nathan that Grace's stay was temporary, a reality he'd begun to forget in their comfortable routine. The thought sat uneasily as he rode into Whitefish. The town was bustling despite the recent storm, with shopkeepers clearing paths and travelers finally continuing journeys long delayed. Nathan completed his errands efficiently, purchasing the paper Grace requested along with a few other supplies. As he secured his purchases to his saddle, a familiar voice called his name. "Xavier, that really you coming into civilization voluntarily?" Nathan turned to see Marshall Davis, the local lawman and one of the few people Nathan considered a friend. "Marshall," he greeted with a nod. "Just restocking after the storm." Davis fell into step beside him. "Heard you might have company up at your place." Stagecoach driver was running his mouth about abandoning some useless woman during the storm, said she was heading toward your property. His expression darkened. "Been meaning to ride out and check, but the weather had other ideas." "She's fine," Nathan confirmed. "Name's Grace Bennett, former teacher. Driver was wrong about her being useless." Davis raised an eyebrow at Nathan's defensive tone. "Glad to hear it. She planning to stay in these parts?" The question caught Nathan off guard. In truth, they hadn't discussed Grace's plans beyond getting her to the train station. The realization bothered him more than it should. "Don't know," he admitted. "She mentioned an aunt in Vermont." "Well, if she's looking for work, school board's still trying to replace old Mrs. Winters. Retirement's been official for months, but no qualified candidates." Davis shrugged. "Just a thought." Nathan nodded, mind already racing with possibilities. "Appreciate the information." The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than usual as Nathan considered what to say to Grace. The idea of her leaving twisted something inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, not since losing his wife and infant son to fever in '78. He'd built his life around solitude after that, convinced it was safer than risking such pain again. Yet in just a week, Grace had carved out a place in his home and, he reluctantly admitted, his heart. Her intelligence, resilience, and quiet strength reminded him that there was more to life than mere survival. He found her in the cabin, reading one of his medical texts by the fire, Scout curled contentedly at her feet. She looked up with a smile that warmed him more thoroughly than the crackling flames. "How was town?" she asked, marking her place in the book. Nathan set down his purchases. "Informative, school's looking for a teacher." Grace's eyes widened. "Here in Whitefish, previous teacher retired." "No replacement yet." He busied himself unpacking supplies, avoiding her gaze. "Thought you might be interested." Yes, I would be," she said, standing quickly. "That's exactly the opportunity I was hoping for when I came west." Nathan nodded, still not looking at her. "Train to Helena leaves tomorrow. Could take you to the station if you want to continue your journey, or," he finally met her eyes, "could introduce you to the school board here." Grace studied his face, her expression thoughtful. "What would you prefer, Nathan?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. He'd expected her to make her decision without consulting his feelings on the matter. That she cared enough to ask spoke volumes. "Prefer you stayed," he admitted gruffly. "You're good company, and good for this place." He gestured around the cabin, which had never felt more like a home than during her stay. "But it's your choice. Won't hold you to anything out of obligation." Grace moved closer, her eyes never leaving his. It's not obligation I'm feeling, Nathan. The air between them changed, charged with unspoken possibilities. Nathan found himself stepping forward, closing the distance until they stood mere inches apart. "What are you feeling, then?" he asked, voice low. "That perhaps I've found where I belong," she whispered. "Not just a place, but a person." Nathan's calloused hand rose to her cheek, thumb gently tracing her jawline. "Been alone a long time, not sure I remember how to be anything else." "We could learn together," Grace suggested, leaning slightly into his touch. "If you wanted to." Instead of answering with words, Nathan lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded eagerly. When they finally parted, both breathless, he kept her close, forehead resting against hers. "Stay," he said simply. "Not just for the teaching position, stay for this for us." Grace's smile could have melted the Montana snow. "I'd like nothing better." The following weeks brought rapid changes to both their lives. Grace interviewed with the school board and was immediately offered the position, her credentials and obvious passion for education outweighing any concerns about her being a newcomer. She moved into the town's small teacherage during the week, returning to Nathan's ranch on weekends and holidays. Their arrangement raised eyebrows initially, but Grace's exemplary conduct as the new schoolteacher soon quieted most gossip. Nathan, for his part, found himself making more frequent trips to town, often bringing along his wooden carvings, which just as Grace had predicted sold well to travelers and locals alike. Spring arrived with its particular chaos of calving, planting, and repairs, but with Grace's organizational skills and practical support, Nathan found the work less overwhelming than in previous years. They developed a rhythm, each complementing the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. On a warm evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Nathan reached for Grace's hand. "Been thinking," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. He smiled, squeezing her fingers. "This arrangement we have you in town, me here, it works, but, she prompted when he hesitated, "rather have you here all the time." He turned to face her fully. "Proper, though, as my wife." Grace's eyes widened, then filled with tears that caught the fading sunlight. "Nathan Xavier, are you proposing marriage? Doing my best at it," he confirmed with a self-deprecating chuckle. "Not particularly eloquent." "Eloquence is overrated," she declared, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married in July, a simple ceremony in Whitefish's small church with Marshall Davis as best man and several of Grace's students scattering wildflowers in her path. Nathan wore a new suit that Grace insisted wasn't an extravagance but an investment, and she wore a dress of pale blue that matched the summer sky. "Never thought I'd have this again," Nathan confessed that night as they lay together in what was now truly their bed. "Family. Purpose beyond just surviving." Grace traced the lines of his face in the moonlight. "The men on that stagecoach did me a favor when they abandoned me. They led me to you." "Still planning to have a word with that driver," Nathan growled. "Leaving anyone in that cold, let it go," Grace said gently. "Everything worked out perfectly, and I've proven I'm far from useless." "Never believed that for a moment," Nathan assured her, pulling her closer. "Knew your worth from the start." As summer turned to fall and then winter again, their partnership only strengthened. With Grace's business acumen and Nathan's practical skills, the ranch prospered beyond either's expectations. Her classroom flourished equally, with students showing remarkable progress under her guidance. They faced challenges of course, drought, illness, the occasional dispute with neighboring ranchers, but together, they weathered each storm. And when, in their second spring together, Grace announced she was expecting a child, Nathan's joy knew no bounds. "Boy or girl doesn't matter," he declared, placing a protective hand over her still flat stomach. "Long as they have your brains and heart. And your strength and integrity," Grace added, covering his hand with hers. "They'll be extraordinary either way." On a crisp autumn morning in 1889, Elizabeth Ann Xavier entered the world with a lusty cry that her father swore could be heard clear to the mountains. With Grace's dark hair and Nathan's determined chin, she was, in the words of Dr. Simmons, perfect in every particular. As Nathan held his daughter for the first time, gazing down at her tiny face while Grace watched with exhausted pride, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed in just 2 years. From solitary survivalist to husband, father, and successful rancher, all because a stagecoach driver had abandoned a supposedly useless woman near his property. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked softly, reaching for his hand. "That I'm the luckiest man in Montana territory," he answered honestly. "That everything I never knew I wanted came to me in a snowstorm." Grace smiled, her eyes shining with love. "We found each other exactly when we needed to. Some might call that fate." "Some might," Nathan agreed, settling carefully beside her on the bed, their daughter nestled between them. "I call it the best decision I ever made." By their 5th anniversary, the Xavier Ranch had tripled in size and productivity. Grace continued teaching, bringing Elizabeth to school with her once she was old enough, and later their son James, born 2 years after his sister. The cabin expanded into a proper house with a dedicated schoolroom where Grace tutored neighboring children during summer months. Nathan's carvings became renowned throughout the territory, with orders coming from as far as San Francisco. Grace's orchard flourished, producing apples that won prizes at the territorial fair. But their greatest achievement, both agreed, was the family they'd built a home filled with love, learning, and laughter. On winter evenings, they still played chess by the fire, Grace usually winning, though Nathan's skills had improved considerably under her tutelage. They read aloud from their ever-expanding library, discussed politics and philosophy, and planned for their children's future with optimistic practicality. And sometimes, when the children were asleep and the house quiet, Nathan would take Grace's hand and lead her to the porch, where they'd stand together looking at the stars, remembering that first winter and marveling at how a moment of compassion had changed everything. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked once. Stopping for a stranger in the snow, Nathan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Only regret is that I almost didn't. Can't imagine this life without you in it. Nor I without you," she whispered back. "My useless self found purpose here." "Never useless," he corrected firmly. "Just waiting to find where you belonged." Grace smiled up at him, the love of years shining in her eyes. "I belonged with you, always." In the vast Montana sky above them, stars winked their agreement, bearing witness to a love that had begun in the harshest of winters, but bloomed into something more enduring than the mountains themselves, proof that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful stories.